Hello, everybody. I'm Vanessa Anastasopoulos. I'm the chair of the ICCI, and I'd like to welcome you to part 2 of the ICCI workshop, Your Daily Rate, What's the Magic Formula? As I mentioned at the start of part 1 a couple of days ago, the ICCI is operated by a steering committee of 8 volunteers, all of whom are CES members with a passion for strengthening the sense of community among independent evaluation consultants in Canada. ICCI membership is free for CES members, as are our activities, which you can attend live or you can watch later on our brand new, soon to be launched ICCI YouTube channel. ICCI members can expect to be invited to online learning and networking events like this one about every 3 months. And as a reminder, the session is being recorded, so please turn your video camera off to protect your privacy. ICCI members can also join our online discussion forum, which is hosted by CES. So you just have to log into the website, click on communities in the membership area, and hit subscribe to the ICCI forum. We're just getting this discussion off the ground. And in fact, I just posted something today inviting people to go there and start sharing, just introducing yourselves to one another. It would be great if we could do that to start building our community. And the more people that subscribe and join the discussion, either by asking questions about independent consulting or answering other people's questions, the more our whole community will benefit from the learnings. Okay, so let's turn now to part 2 of our workshop, Your Daily Rate, What's the Magic Formula? Delivered by Gail Vallance Barrington, who's the past chair of ICCI, and Don Murray, ICCI Steering Committee member. This workshop will be in English, but please feel free to ask your questions either in English or in French, and there will be a Q&A period at the end of the presentation.
Right, I'll quickly introduce myself. Don Murray here. I'm a senior consultant with Harry Cumming & Associates, a small consulting firm. We're based in Guelph, Ontario, but I'm currently living in Kamloops, BC. I've been working in the evaluation and research area for almost 25 years now, and I've been a credentialed evaluator for about 10 years. The main sectors that I work in, actually it's quite varied. So I've been a project leader manager on over 80 major evaluation and research projects in the health sector, education, social services, finance, manufacturing, and as well natural resources. And I'll just hand that over to you, Gail.
Oh, thanks, Don. So I'm Gail Vallance Barrington, and I've been an independent consultant for more than 35 years. I started my company as a sole proprietor and built it up until it was an incorporated company with 20 employees. And then I downsized again until I would return to where I am now, which is in my basement, very happily working here in my little office. And so independent consulting has been a passion for me throughout. And I've done many workshops over the years at our conferences, both the CES conference and the American Evaluation Association, also a couple of times for the European Evaluation Society. And I've written a book on independent consulting, which we'll show you a copy of at the end of the slides again. And I wrote many blogs over the years. And I just love talking about it because I think it's so exciting to be an independent consultant, and there are many challenges and issues and so on, but the rewards are so great in terms of personal satisfaction that it's certainly been worth every step of the journey. So we're glad to see you again today, and we'll take it from here. So we're just reposting our land acknowledgements, which we read on Tuesday. And here is our agenda for today. First of all, we're going to do about 15 minutes, if you need it, on questions arising from Tuesday and the homework that you were assigned and so on. And starting out with the fact that there was a glitch on the worksheet, worksheet number 1, which had a ripple effect throughout. So we want to correct that as soon as possible. Then we're going to discuss a sample rate calculation. We're going to show you a worksheet for exactly what's involved. But during that process, we're also going to talk about salary and profit, because those are 2 key topics that I think need to be unpacked. And then there's worksheet number 5, which is calculating your own daily rate. And so depending on time, how much time we have to work on that. Then we're going to have feedback and comments and so on. But we also then want a brief discussion at the end about what do you want next in terms of IC training. So that's pretty well our overview, and we have at the moment 50 minutes to do that. So let's start here with issues arising, questions. Don, I was wondering, can you show, like when you turn off the slides, could you put up the worksheet so that we can show where the changes have happened?
Yep, I can do that. Yep.
And everybody, the worksheet is also, the new revised ones are posted in the chat box. Now for this discussion period as well, we're actually going to be happy to see your faces and to ask you to raise your hand, use the little hand raising thing if you want to contribute to the discussion. So we'll just put the worksheets up for a sec so I can go over where and Dawn can go over where the changes occurred. There was a slight miscalculation.
Right. Are you seeing my screen?
Yeah.
Right. So what we did here was the on worksheet number 1 on billable days, there was some of the numbers were in error here in the last 2 sort of in this collection of 4 figures here. So for 2 weeks, this was reading as 15 days. That should have been 10 days. And under the billable time weeks, I think this was 38. So this has been correctly adjusted to 33, which then comes out to a total of 165. So those were the changes, just the little bit of numbers, the figures that were in these last 2 sort of rows, and they have now been corrected in the worksheet that I've shared this morning.
And I want to say it's totally my fault, because these worksheets were originally from workshops that I've done for many years. But based on feedback that I got and read in the consulting literature, I felt that we needed more time for independent consultants just starting out, especially for marketing and research. Whereas on the other hand, admin and professional development and so on would take perhaps less time in that first year, or that you would be able to portion less time to those 2 items. So that's where there was a bit of an error. So now we're at 33 weeks and 165 billable days. And then that plays out when we get to
Worksheet number 4. Yep. And I have made the adjustment, so the correction has been carried through to the worksheet that we'll be looking at later as well.
So that when we're it's the denominator, the cost for 165 billable days is the change that we made. So apologies for that. I hate to confuse people, and I hope you'll be able to survive. Okay, so now is time for feedback. So Dawn, if you want to take off the worksheet, and people, if you want to put on your cameras and raise your hand if you have some question, or tell us about your experience, or, you know, I mean, we totally understand it if you didn't have time to work on it at all, but those of you who did give it a try, how did you do? Just say your costs have gone up, and come up with some modest increase. That would be what I would suggest. What do you think, Don?
I think as well, you have to have an honest discussion with individuals about this is the cost of doing business. I think sometimes we run the risk sometimes of when we're trying to be competitive, taking a razor to our rates and cutting little pieces out just to get in there with a bid that we think is going to be attractive, knowing that it's a fixed budget that they have to work within. And then you've set a precedent, right? In terms of, especially if you go back and you work with that client a second or third time, they think, you know, we worked with you a year ago, your rates were this. It seems to be that you really inflated these rates. Well, I was actually giving you a discounted rate in the first place. And I think you need to have those discussions early on. If that's what you're doing, in fact, you're actually giving them, letting them know that, you know, I want this work. I want to be a partner with you in this opportunity. Normally I would be charging this, but I wanted to be, again, I was really attracted about this opportunity and I really wanted to put in a competitive bid to get this work. But going forward, I'd like to see if we can negotiate about having something that is, you know, a rate that is more in line with what my actual billing should be, if that would be at all possible. So I think just having a discussion, being an authentic sort of discussion about where you're coming from with that rate that you went in and that first sort of relationship, and where you're coming at now in terms of we need to sort of maybe get back in touch with reality here in terms of what I need for my income stream.
And so value your client and let them know you value them. It's not a money grab, right? That's a real problem. They need to understand that your costs have increased. And I don't know whether it's a good idea, but maybe you could have a meeting to sit down and talk about it and explain, for example, or even show them some comparative figures in terms of the difference in the cost that you're dealing with. I mean, even rent must be a huge difference. And so they can't expect it. So that's one strategy. Another one would be start looking for other clients where you, you know, you can state what your rate is and not have that history behind you. So do kind of transition, see yourself transitioning to other clients as well. Don, do you have a suggestion?
I would just say also on certain bidding, I will purposely put in 2 price budgets. I will price out what I think, here's a real cost if I go up my standard rate, right? And I'm giving you everything that you've asked for in the scope of work that you've wanted. And it's coming in at about $10,000 to $15,000 over budget based on the budget that you'd indicated in the RFP. But for me, that's the real cost of doing that work, right? And the quality of the team that I'm bringing this is the team I'm putting together to do that work. This is the way we can do it at this rate. But then I would put a budget B in place as well, saying, here's what I can do at a reduced. So here's where we've adjusted our rates. Here's where we've sort of maybe made some other cuts to maybe the scope of work. But I want to open their eyes a little bit about, you know, you've asked for this, and I don't think your budget is that realistic for all that you've asked for, right? And we're being very competitive with our rates. But we can work with you along these lines, right? That we would give a little bit compromise here and we little compromise here. I don't do it in every RFP. In fact, I'm very select when I make that option. I have to know the client. Maybe I have a history already with the client, so I feel comfortable about sharing that sort of analysis about 2 budgets and what I think is sort of, you know, here's what we ideally would like to come in at versus here's where we can maybe make a bit of a compromise. But that's one way that we come at some of the work where we feel that there's almost a sense that we need to sort of let the client know that they're being a little unrealistic about what they're asking for with the scope of work and the budget they've put out there. So we try and maybe help them understand that these are the sort of things that we're working against. We want to do the work. We've got a quality team, but for the price you're offering, there's, you know, we need to have maybe some room to negotiate on how that's going to play out if we were to go to sort of to continue.
And another thing that I've done is get the client to do more of the work and offer the training to their staff in order for them to be able to do that. So, I mean, there's a long-term benefit for them as well. But then you don't have to pay, you know, whatever it is, surveyors or interviewers or whatever to collect the data. You simply would train their staff to do that part of the work. And so that could lower your cost as well. I think that's a good point. I think a lot of consultants have two streams that they offer in terms of the work. Some of them do just plain market research, or others do something in personnel, for example, or in industrial training, those sorts of things. And so it may well be that your pricing strategies are different. I guess what we're trying to get at here is to develop a benchmark. This whole workshop is about, this is a benchmark. This is what you need in order to survive and to make the money, more or less, is what you need to have your income. And then you can make all these decisions in terms of letting this client have a better deal for whatever reason, or charging more because, what your stuff that you're selling is at such a premium. So I don't know, are you working in AI at all, for example? That would be, yeah. You see, so that's high demand. And so I think it's reasonable to raise your rates according to that. But what we're talking about here is, this is what I need to survive. This is my benchmark, and I can make decisions knowing that. So Vanessa's example is that her benchmark is out of date. And so, it's important to change it and to be realistic that way.
Yeah,
So
interesting. And interesting point raised by Paisley in the chat as well around, when you're in a multi-year project with a contract, maybe even 5 years. We've done 5-year projects or 3-year projects. And so somehow maybe looking at maybe trying to adjust for inflation as part of your budgeting. We just went through a period of high inflation. We're just coming out of, that went on for a while. That was sort of painful for a lot of people. And, what would you sort of factor in? Some sort of a rate there to sort of maybe provide you security for that change over time. I think that's a good point around being mindful of the need to maybe adjust that your rates as you're sort of building out or budgeting for a multi-year project.
Yeah. And what I've done sometimes, when it's possible, certainly not with the federal government because they're not as flexible, but in other situations, when it's a multi-year contract, I've designed it so that there's kind of like an out clause at the end of each year. But it works both ways. Is the client satisfied with my work? Have I produced what they wanted? Am I happy working there? Which is a subtext, which I won't necessarily tell them about, but you don't want to be stuck for 5 years in a project that you hate. And so you reassess at the end of a year and then do a strategic planning in terms of where you're going to go in year 2, and then develop a contract for that year. So it's a year-by-year contract, even if it's a 5-year project. Now, I've been able to talk some clients into working that way, and they were happy because they were able to adjust and to also tell me about things they wanted changed as they were going along. So that's another strategy. You don't show the client how you arrived at your per diem. It's like it's a given, okay, that this is my daily rate. And we just assume that there's all this background, which we're doing here, that has gone on. I always like to use milestones because I felt the client has a tangible product during the progress of the study and not waiting for that dreadful moment when the final report is finally released. Everybody is exhausted and the organization has already moved on, and you're not being very effective that way. So I used to do monthly status reports. And with the status report came an invoice. So I invoiced them, and it depended on the project, whether it was actuals or whether we took the chunk, which of course was based on my per diem, and then just divided it up by 12 or however we decided was the best way to do it. But it was a very comfortable way to work because I had to write the status report every month and tell the client exactly how much I had done. And then it was good for me because for my cash flow, I was getting a regular paycheck from them. So I think it's going to be flexible and it's going to vary on the project. But I don't ever show the per diem calculation. I hope that answers your question. Okay, so this is basically what we've been talking about. Your desired salary, operational costs, billable days, desired profit, and your daily rate. So right now, we're going to talk about desired salary because there's a few things to consider. Don, can we have the next slide? So, for example, what are your household needs? And of course, this is going to vary individual by individual in terms of, do you have a partner? Is the partner also making an income? What are your costs? Do you have kids in school? Do you have kids in university? Have you got a mortgage? I mean, all these household costs. And then there also may be elder care involved. Like there's a lot of responsibilities that we're carrying along with us all the time. So that's the first thing to consider is how much does our household need from me on a yearly basis? So think about that. Then, what was your salary in your last job? I always made a point of saying that I was never going to make less in consulting than I had when I was a community college instructor, which is what I was doing before that. And so that was sort of always in the back of my mind that I wanted to make that or more. And in fact, I always did make a little more or quite a bit more than that. And then what do you think you should be making? This is totally personal in terms of what am I worth? Now you have to be careful from that, especially if you have an inflated ego, because the market may not agree with you about that. But what do you think is going to be realistic? So when you're thinking about your salary, there's quite a few considerations. And if you have a partner, I would sit down and have a heart-to-heart about that before you go any further. Because for a number of reasons, and one of them is if you're just starting out, just considering becoming a consultant, you need to have your family on board. And it's the only way that is going to lead to success. And so everybody has to support you in this initiative. And it's better to find that out now, not when you're, in Saskatoon with a dreadful project that's taking all your time night and day, and you can't be home to go to the parent-teacher interview and so on. So it takes a big demand on your time being an independent consultant. And while, as Don said the other day, we may not be traveling as much as we used to, we do still travel. And your family needs to be able to cope with that as well. I mean, I had one colleague whose family was always having a crisis, and they were always calling her in the middle of a client meeting or whatever, and she had to leave to deal with it, and it was just totally untenable. So in a case like that, I would say maybe this isn't the right time to be an independent consultant. Maybe you should wait a while until things are calmer and more settled and there aren't so many demands on your time.
Yeah, you can also think about different entry scenarios or strategies where, if you are working full-time and you're about to make that leap, maybe think about scaling back to a part-time, hang on to that job. If it's bearable, if you think you can sort of the work that you're doing is something that is still appealing to you, then see if maybe you can scale back gradually into full-time consulting. And then that just gives you a bit more security for a steady bankable stream of income. Will probably put your family a little at ease as well, knowing that you still have that stream coming in. But just think about different strategies as opposed, if you think that it's a bit of a risk, that maybe small steps can be taken as an entryway.
Yeah, it does. And it also raises the whole issue of transition. Now, a few years ago, I did a little study and I interviewed independent consultants who started when they were more than age 50. They were over 50 and they were now starting to think about having a consulting career. And it is a transitional point for many reasons. And so I got a lot of useful information from them. And it is, just so you know, it's an article that's in New Directions 2019, Consulting After 50, Redirection and Reinvention. So one of the things that I found out, they didn't all just stop and then start a consulting practice. It was more of a flow from one to the other. Some of them stayed in their current job and planned their exit strategy, did their research and reading, did the setup stuff for their business, did a lot of marketing and taking people to lunch and finding out about the nature of the environment and where evaluation was in demand. one person took an interim job. She didn't like her job, so she quit it, but she took another easier job that she knew she wasn't going to be in long term, but at least paid her rent and so on while she was doing the setup for her business. Another option is to work as a subcontractor for a larger consulting firm, which is a great way to begin because you get to see how other people do it. And you can decide what you like and what you don't like about the way they handle their projects and so on. And at the same time, you're designing and organizing your own business. Or you can perhaps talk to your current boss and work out an arrangement where you work for them just part-time and say, I'm thinking about going into consulting and I need to transition into it slowly. Can I work, like 2 days a week or whatever? And, it depends on your boss, but sometimes they're willing to do that. Sometimes people have taken projects from their current work into their own independent consulting. And if everybody was agreeable about that, that was a great way to start. And then in one situation, the individual had been basically terminated. It was during COVID, and she got a nice severance package. So she lived on that while she was setting up her own independent consulting business. So then we need to talk about profit. And in some circles, profit is kind of a dirty word, like in the not-for-profit sector, let's say. And I have been, asked by clients, what's your profit margin? And they were horrified when I said 15%. Well, 15% is reasonable. 10% is okay, but if I could get 15%, I was going to be happier. It's a dangerous subject, so you have to tread gently. But consider the field that you're working in and what the market will bear. So like I said, some not-profits are pretty antsy about that. And then think about your rainy day fund, because of course the flow of projects is not even. There are times when you're loaded with work and there are other times when you don't have enough. And so that's when you have to start to rely on your rainy day fund in order to keep paying your rent or whatever your expenses are. So in my field, which was health and education, I felt that 10 to 15% was just what was palatable for my clients. And I'm sure that some of you that work in high-powered business areas, it certainly could be higher than that. And also don't forget that when we're calculating profit into the formula that we're going to look at next, you're already paying your salary. Okay, so it's not like you're not making any money. You're making the money you said you needed in the first place. And so this is a cushion, which is going to be an addition. And I would also say that you have to learn to manage really well and really carefully so that you come up with good business practices that help you save time in the projects you're working on, so that you actually may make some money on some of these projects by completing them in a very efficient way. Okay, let's do it. Let's go to the daily calculation. All right, so you should be on worksheet 4. Let's look at the sample rate calculation. Is everybody with me okay? Are we all right? Any thumbs up here? Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. Just want to know that we're on task here. So step 1 is determine desired salary. Okay, so you've thought about that, you've talked to people, you know what you would like your yearly salary to be. So here in our example, we've said 90,000. Now, I don't know whether you think that's a lot or you don't think it's enough, but let's use that as our example. And then secondly, you've already, if you had a chance to fill in the worksheet that Dawn went over on Tuesday, determined your operational costs for a year. And we're going here with a sort of a ballpark of 30,000. So those are your total costs, which is your desired salary plus your operational costs. So total costs for you to run your consulting business, this is if you're doing it full time, would be $120,000. Okay, Now then, we figured out that we have 165 billable days. So your daily rate would be $727. And then if we take a profit of 10%, that's $73. And it works out to $800 for an 8-hour day. And so you might have a sense of confidence now because you know that your daily rate is 800. Now, what if you come across a project which is shorter or smaller, or for whatever reason you feel it's appropriate to you to bill an hourly rate instead of a daily rate? Then I would say, in this case, it's 800 divided by 8 is 100 an hour. But I would say I would round it up to 125. Because I think there's a premium if you're going to be charging an hourly rate there's a premium if you have a daily rate, but if it's an hourly rate, I think you should be able to charge a little bit more. It's a little more expensive. And it's more expensive for you if you're only doing an hour here and an hour there, because you have to change gears and get yourself organized to work on another project and so on. So the last worksheet then is for you. And this, of course, is the magic formula. And this is, remember, your benchmark. So you can either quickly, if you have the information, or if you want to take this away and work on it on the weekend or whatever to figure out your operational costs, which may take some time, this is where you come up with your daily rate. What I did was, I mean, the daily rate was for me, it wasn't for them. So I was more looking around the market to see what was appropriate for junior researchers or just interviewers, for example. And it also depended on the budget. Once my per diem was taken care of, what was left in the budget, how many people could I hire, and what could I reasonably offer them as an hourly rate. And so it was more variable. And you can also look on government or small business websites and so on, and you'll see where it's broken down into what junior consultants and different levels typically are making. And that is variable for sure. I mean, I always went with the federal government and what was their number of hours, and I think it was 7.5 when I was working. And so it wasn't an 8-hour day at all. It was a 7.5-hour day. So that is just part of your calculation. Again, I think that's going to be variable. It depends on your history in terms of what projects you've had so far. And I always like to have a mix of small, medium, and large. Like a large project is a multi-year project, I would say, or at least 1 year in duration. And so to balance that off, you could have 2 or 3 other projects, which would be shorter term, maybe back to back. And then you might have a few gigs, which are like 1 or 2 days, like doing a training workshop or something like that. It makes the work more interesting, and you don't end up with all your final reports happening on March 31 or whatever it is, which is disastrous. So you try to stagger your projects and stagger the size.
Also, I would just mention about income in terms of multiple projects and so on. Pay attention to the payment schedule that you're negotiating in your contract, that it is sort of reasonably sort of equal payments throughout the life cycle of that project. As much as possible, avoid having something like I've seen it out there. I mean, I don't think ultimately it was something I decided not to bid on because it was a 60% holdback on the final budget, which was just, to me, is ridiculous.
It's unfair. Yeah, and so it sort of gives you a sense. You can just read between the lines that this is the attitude that these people have, and so they don't really value the experience of consultants very much. They're just thinking about their own budget. And you've got to pay your rent. I mean, you can't possibly wait a whole year to get 60% of your project. It's not realistic, and I don't think it's fair. So I think it's worth asking and explaining and saying, for example, and I have staff I have to pay and they have mortgages. And so it's much more effective for me. And if I know that I'm going to be, having a monthly income, that was one of the reasons why I started with the status reports. But then they started to become really happy with the status reports, because if their boss asked them, well, how's that evaluation going? They could just pull out the latest status report and have an update. It would have like a field report in it, how many interviews we've done. And then there'd be a little discussion session that identified any emerging issues or any, successes that we'd experienced during the month. It also kept me on my toes because I knew I had to do a certain amount of work before the end of the month in order to be able to bill them and to create that status report. So there was a measured approach to getting the work done and not leaving it until later when something else came up that was more pressing. Do we have any other questions? Any feedback or comments? Well, just think about it, drop them in the chat.
And we'll go to maybe then the
Yeah.
Yep. What would you like to see as a next IC talking event or training event?
But what is your other next most pressing issue? Insurance.
Yep.
Marketing is always big.
And marketing? Networking between this group, absolutely. I think I've always wondered about having some sort of a bank of consultants that I could go and look at in terms of, I just need one other additional resource that I need to pull into this team. And I would ideally like to have that at my fingertips to sort of quickly sort of scroll through that to see, okay, here are what the qualifications, specializations are, pick up the phone, call them, let's work.
Okay, it's good to know you like the two-part workshop and you like the hour. That's super helpful. RFPs, of course. We were talking about that this morning before we started.
Yep, I think a piece on contracts, but also on the RFPs around strategies, the thinking process, so that it's almost like coming up with a decision tree around when you continue, deciding to continue down this path, to put work into bidding on this versus deciding that it's not worth your time and dropping out before you invest too much time in it.
Tax issues, using AI. We did an AI workshop in the spring. I don't know if that, Vanessa, is that recording going to be available on our website?
It is currently available on the CES website. So anybody, you're all members, so anybody with a membership to CES can just log in and get that recording.
There we go. So here's our information if you want to know more. I'd certainly link in to our new chat, our new discussion forum, because it can become a really potent, useful place to go, just even to explain some of your experiences, to ask colleagues for what they would do when certain things happen. The American Evaluation Association has their topical interest group for independent consultants, and they have a listserv that is very highly used, and people connect on it. They say, I have a project and I need somebody who's good at stats or whatever, and they often then collaborate and work together that way. So it's a good way to find associates.
Well, we are coming up on the top of the hour, and I think I've got what we'll probably do is go away with all of the feedback that we've had as part of these this 2-day session. I think we've got a good starting list for future topics that we'll build out from, and we'll so long as you're on our email list, we'll probably be reaching out to you with the next steps and next ideas for discussion items.
Well, thank you for your attention. It's been great working with you, and all the best. We wish you lots of luck.